The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, thick white envelope in hand, shimmering gold edges catching the early sun as I held it up. It looked like something straight out of a glossy travel magazine, complete with a sketch of a private jet gliding through clouds. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the weight of every slight my family had tossed my way over the years. My name is Alex Holloway. I'm 33 years old, and I live in Denver. I run a logistics software firm that just signed a major contract with the Department of Defense. My business is finally getting the recognition I'd fought for. I didn't always have the same seat at the table as the rest of my family. My younger sister Carly has always been the star, the one they pinned their hopes on, and she's known it, too. She never let me forget it. She runs a VC firm in New York, all blazers and boardrooms, and I've always been the afterthought. Last year, she forgot to tell me about the Holloway family's annual executive retreat in Aspen. I found out a week later, scrolling through her Instagram, where she was posting photos of mountaintop hot tubs and caviar dinners. I told myself it didn't bother me, that I was better off staying out of their world, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't care. I dropped the envelope onto the kitchen counter, feeling a small smile tug at the corners of my mouth. This year, they couldn't shut me out, not after what I'd pulled off. The Department of Defense contract had changed everything. My name was in headlines, my phone ringing with new clients. And now, here was my formal invitation to the Holloway family retreat, the same one Carly had told me I wouldn't really fit in at. I could hear her voice in my head as I read the letter, dripping with forced courtesy. Alex, you'll embarrass us if you show up in those worn jeans and that old jacket. My jaw tightened. Let her think I was the same broke older brother she'd always rolled her eyes at. Let her think she still had the upper hand. What she didn't know was that the private jet she thought she'd chartered for this retreat, it wasn't just any leased plane. It was mine. My company had quietly acquired the small air travel firm that handled these exclusive flights. She didn't know, and I wasn't about to tell her. Not yet. I picked up my phone and sent a message to my assistant, Kara. Hey, make sure the Gulfstream is detailed and ready by Friday. I want it perfect. A few seconds later, she replied with a thumbs-up emoji. I leaned back against the counter, feeling the quiet satisfaction of it all. They thought I was still the tag-along brother, the one who'd never quite made it. But this time, I wasn't just invited. I was in control. I ran a hand through my hair, glancing at the envelope one last time. The weight of it felt different now, not heavy with rejection, but electric with the promise of payback. Carly was about to learn she should have treated her older brother with a little more respect. The call came the next day, right around lunch. I was at the office, going over numbers with my accountant, when my phone buzzed with Mom's name flashing across the screen. I let it ring a couple times, just to brace myself. My mother never called for small talk. Hi, Mom, I said finally, leaning back in my chair. Oh, Alex, sweetie, she cooed, voice dripping with the kind of concern that always felt just a little too rehearsed. I wanted to check in. How are things at work? You're staying busy, I hope. I watched the private jet from my office window, sitting at the end of the runway, sunlight glinting off the silver fuselage. My jet. I pictured her face if she knew. Yeah, I said, playing along. Busy as ever. How's Dad? She ignored the question. Listen, Alex, she said, her voice softening like she was about to break some tragic news. About the Aspen trip. My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice calm. What about it? Well, she began, drawing out the word. This year's trip is going to be very selective. You know how these things are. It's important to maintain a certain family image. I bit back a laugh. I could almost see her, sitting in that overstuffed armchair in the living room, the same one she'd scolded me from every Thanksgiving dinner, carefully choosing her words so she could pretend she wasn't cutting me out. Family image, huh? I said, voice dry. She went on, unfazed. Yes, dear. You know your father's new finance partners will be there. Carly's investor friends. It's important to keep things consistent. I leaned back in my chair, glancing again at the jet outside, freshly waxed and waiting. Right. Consistent, I said. Yes, exactly, she said, relief creeping into her tone. I know you understand. It's just for this year. We don't want any misunderstandings. I let a moment of silence stretch between us, like a taut string. I thought about the letter on my counter, the one that said Mr. Alexander Holloway in gold ink. About the fact that, while she was busy spinning her polite little excuses, my jet was being prepped for a flight she thought didn't include me. Sure, Mom, I said finally, my voice as calm as ever. No hard feelings. I'll just swing by the tarmac to see you all off. She hesitated. Oh, that's not. Just for a few minutes, I cut in. I'd love to see everyone before they leave. I could hear the confusion in her pause, the momentary crack in her carefully rehearsed script. Oh, well, If you're sure. I'm sure, I said. I let her think I was bowing out gracefully, letting them have their perfect little weekend without me. She didn't know that the real show was just about to start. I hung up and looked out at the jet one more time. My jet. For a moment, I let myself smile. Let them think they'd shut me out again. Let them think I was still the same kid who never measured up. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. I got to the airport early that Saturday morning. The air was crisp and cold, the kind of mountain air that promised expensive ski trips and overpriced hot chocolate. I parked my beat-up Ford pickup in the far lot, the same truck I'd driven for years. Let them see me in it, I thought, grinning as I ran a hand over the faded hood. It wasn't about show. Not anymore. I wore my oldest jeans and a Columbia pullover I'd had since college. My hair was messy from the wind, no watch or designer sunglasses in sight. I wanted to see the look on Carly's face when she spotted me. She never could hide her disgust. The tarmac was already busy. A line of black SUVs and luxury sedans snaked up to the jet. My jet. I watched from a distance, hands in my pockets, as the Holloway family's so-called inner circle arrived one by one. Carly got there first, in her leased Maserati. She stepped out in a tailored camel coat and those sunglasses she probably spent a month's rent on. She tossed her hair back, her smile as bright as the snow-capped mountains behind her. Her eyes swept the lot, looking for the VIPs she'd been bragging about for weeks. Then she saw me. She paused, her expression going tight for a split second. "Alex," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Are you here to valet?" I let the question hang in the air for a moment, watching her squirm. "Nah," I said finally, nodding toward the jet behind her. "Just making sure everything's ready." Before she could respond, Mom pulled up in her fake pearl-studded Escalade. She got out with a practiced smile and a stiff little wave, acting like nothing was out of place. "Alex," she said, her voice calm but her eyes darting nervously. "What a surprise to see you here." I gave her a small smile, my hands still tucked in my pockets. "Yeah, figured I'd stop by." Then Dad rolled up in his classic Jag, the one he bragged about but never quite admitted had a salvage title. He stepped out in a pressed blazer, glancing at me like I was the help. "Son," he said with a tight nod, not quite sure what to make of me standing there in my old jeans. "Dad," I said, my voice even. "You excited for Aspen?" He cleared his throat. "Of course," he said stiffly. "It's a family tradition." Carly let out a quiet, condescending laugh. "You know, Alex," she said, her eyes flicking over my truck parked in the distance, "it's never too late to invest in a real vehicle. Or, you know, some real clothes." I raised an eyebrow at her. "I like what I've got," I said simply. She opened her mouth to say more, but was cut off by the sound of the jet's engine starting up. The captain stepped out, his uniform crisp, his hat pulled low. He glanced around, then walked straight past my father, who was already reaching out to greet him, and stopped in front of me. "Mr. Holloway," he said, his voice steady and respectful. "We're just finishing the final checks, sir. Ready whenever you are." My father's mouth fell open. Carly blinked like she'd been slapped. Mom's smile cracked for just a second. The captain didn't even look at them. He was already focused on me, waiting for my signal. I just nodded. "Thanks," I said, feeling that tight coil of satisfaction settle low in my chest. Carly recovered quickly, her lips twisting into a cold smile. "Well, you certainly know how to make an entrance," she said. "But you're not actually coming with us, right?" I let the question hang there, enjoying the flicker of unease in her eyes. "We'll see," I said finally, my voice light. I just wanted to make sure everything was perfect. And with that, I turned and walked toward the jet, leaving them to watch me go. The engines were still humming when the captain walked back down the steps, a crisp stack of papers in his hands. He didn't even glance at Dad. He stopped right in front of me and handed over the manifest like it was nothing more than a coffee order. "Your flight plan's set, Mr. Holloway," he said, his voice professional and steady. "All final checks are complete." Dad blinked, his hand half raised in some confused attempt at a handshake that never happened. "There must be a mistake," he said, his tone faltering for the first time. "I leased this aircraft. I signed the contract myself." The captain didn't miss a beat. "No mistake, sir," he said, turning to me. "Your name's on every manifest and every maintenance log." I looked at Dad, then at Carly, who was standing there with her jaw half open. Mom was clutching her scarf like it was the only thing holding her together. I took a deep breath and spoke calmly. "No mistake," I said, my voice low but clear. "I bought the company that owns this fleet 6 months ago." Silence. Pure, unfiltered silence that echoed louder than the jet engines behind us. Carly's lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me, like the brother she'd always seen as a background player had been replaced with someone new. You bought it?" she finally stammered. I just nodded. "Every aircraft, every route, every pilot. Mine." Dad took a step back, his face paling. You can't just. I did, I said simply. Mom swallowed hard, her knuckles white on her scarf. But why? She asked in a whisper, her voice so small it was almost lost in the noise. I shrugged lightly. Because I was tired of being shut out, I said. Because this is the only way you'd all see me. Carly's eyes flicked to the captain, like she was hoping for some last-minute save. But he just stood there, respectful and silent. She looked back at me, her expression twisting. You've been planning this, she said quietly. You planned all of this. I didn't bother denying it. Yeah, I said. I knew you'd use this jet. I knew you'd think you had everything under control. And I knew exactly when to let you know the truth. Dad was still frozen, his mouth opening and closing like he was chewing on the words and couldn't quite swallow them. This is absurd, he sputtered. You're trying to humiliate us. I met his eyes, calm and unflinching. No, I said evenly. I'm trying to remind you that I'm not some afterthought. I'm the one flying this plane. I'm the one who makes this possible. The captain shifted slightly, waiting for my cue. I took one last look at my family, seeing them as they really were, shocked, silent, and finally seeing me. You want to keep acting like I'm not part of this family? I said quietly. Fine, but remember this. You're all riding on my jet now. Literally. And with that, I turned back to the captain. Let's get everyone on board, I said. We've got a schedule to keep. He nodded, saluted me, and started up the steps. My family trailed behind, the weight of what I just said hanging in the air like the first crack of thunder before a storm. I didn't look back. Let them feel it. Let them remember. For the first time in my life, I was in the pilot's seat, and they were just along for the ride. We'd barely gotten off the ground before Dad pulled me aside. We were in the small cabin lounge, the leather seats empty except for us. The soft hum of the engines did nothing to soften the tension in the air. Son, he started, his voice low and suddenly warm, like he was trying to pretend we were partners, not strangers. Let's talk business. I just raised an eyebrow. Business? He nodded, glancing around like he was checking for eavesdroppers, even though the only people around were the flight attendants politely pretending they didn't exist. You've done well, he said carefully, clearly, and maybe it's time we work together. I could almost see the gears turning behind his eyes. The way he looked at me, not as his son, but as a piece of leverage he hadn't realized was there before. Dad, I said, my tone as steady as the hum of the engines. The last time we talked business, you called my app nonsense for bored teens. Said I'd never get anywhere unless I joined a family firm. He had the grace to look a little sheepish. Well, things change, he said quickly. We all make mistakes, son. I'm willing to overlook the past. We're a family, after all. I didn't answer right away. I just reached into my bag and pulled out a small folder, thin but heavy with everything he didn't know. I handed it to him without a word. He flipped through it, his brows knitting tighter with each page. Balance sheets, acquisition notices, quiet buyouts of half the suppliers the Holloway Group relied on to keep their logistics arm afloat. His eyes darted up to mine, the color draining from his face. This isn't real, he said, his voice a whisper. It's very real, I said quietly. Your cash flow's been bleeding for months. Carly's firm couldn't keep up the payments. I've been buying your partners out one by one. Carly, who'd been hovering at the door, her smile frozen and eyes wide, stepped closer. Alex, what are you talking about? I turned to her, my voice calm. I'm talking about the fact that your firm's about 3 months away from default, and I'm the only one holding the lifeline. Dad's hand tightened around the folder. You knew, he said, his voice cracking. I nodded. I knew, and I didn't say a word. Not until now. Carly tried to smile, that bright, brittle smile she used to use when she was cornered. We can collaborate, she said quickly. We'll make it work. The Holloway Group and your firm. I shook my head. I'm not here to collaborate, I said. I'm here to make you an offer. Dad swallowed hard. An offer, he echoed. I leaned forward, my voice soft but sharp as a blade. I'll buy out the entire logistics division. Everything. At 30 cents on the dollar. Silence. The only sound was the quiet whoosh of the jet slicing through the sky. Carly's face went pale. You're joking, she whispered. I shrugged. I'm not. I'm offering you a chance to walk away clean, with something left to show for it. Or you can keep pretending everything's fine until the creditors come knocking. Dad's hand shook as he closed the folder. You've been planning this, he said, disbelief and something like fear in his eyes. For months, I said. Because you all taught me something a long time ago, Dad. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I stood up and walked to the window, the Rocky Mountains rising in the distance. I could see our reflection in the glass, me standing tall, Carly looking like she might shatter, and Dad gripping the folder like it was the only thing holding him together. I'll give you until we land in Aspen, I said without turning around. After that, the offer's off the table. The silence behind me was thick as the clouds outside. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for a seat at their table. I was the one flipping the table over. By the time we touched down in Aspen, word had already started to spread. The Holloway family's carefully curated guest list, the one Carly had spent months bragging about, was turning on its head before we even made it to the welcome drinks. I stepped off the jet first, dressed the same as when I got on. Jeans, Columbia pullover, no flashy watches or designer boots. I wanted everyone to see me as I really was. Not the lost brother or the family embarrassment, but the man who owned this jet, this retreat, this moment. The other guests started arriving, their expensive coats and carefully casual scarves whipping in the mountain wind. Carly's investor buddies, the family's finance partners, even the so-called family friends who always talked about legacy like it was a brand. One by one, they saw me standing there, and something shifted in the way they looked at me. I didn't say a word at first. I just waited. Dad tried to put on a brave face, greeting everyone with forced warmth. Carly stuck to his side like glue, her bright white smile cracking at the edges every time someone asked about the family's travel partner. But it didn't matter. Word travels fast in small circles. The first to approach me was Tom Barker, an executive from one of the biggest shipping firms in the state. He smiled and offered his hand, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Alex," he said, "we should talk soon. I hear your team's revolutionizing the whole supply chain game. My company's been following you for months." I shook his hand and nodded. "Glad to hear it, Tom. Let's make it happen." A few minutes later, a woman named Dana, one of Carly's oldest allies, wandered over, a small, tight smile on her lips. "I didn't realize you were running things," she said softly, glancing back at Carly, who was watching us like a hawk. "Your firm's been a godsend for us these past few quarters. Maybe we can expand that relationship." I smiled politely. "I'd love that, Dana. My assistant will get in touch." One by one, they all came over. Some just to say hi, some to talk shop, but all of them with the same look in their eyes, like they'd finally seen the real pecking order, and that it wasn't Carly or Dad at the top anymore. I watched the color drain from Carly's face with each handshake, each quiet conversation she wasn't a part of. She tried to save face, pulling people aside and whispering about image and loyalty, but it was useless. This wasn't her retreat anymore. It wasn't even the Holloway family's. It was mine. When the last of the guests had arrived, I turned to my assistant, Kara, who'd flown in on the last flight, dressed in a sharp suit that was all business and no bullshit. She handed out revised itineraries, her voice calm and professional. "The schedule has changed slightly," she told each guest, her polite smile unwavering. "We'll be focusing more on the future of logistics technology and innovative partnerships." Carly's mouth fell open. "Wait," she said, her voice cracking. "This was supposed to be our retreat." I met her gaze and shrugged. "It was," I said, "but it's not anymore." Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in the space of 10 minutes. Mom sat down hard on a bench, her scarf clutched so tight her knuckles were white. She didn't say a word. Carly's voice dropped to a hiss. "You can't just take everything over like this," she said. I leaned in closer, my voice low and even. "I didn't take it. I built it. And you? You just invited yourself along for the ride." She blinked, her lip trembling for just a second. Then she turned away, her shoulders stiff, her head held high like she still believed her name alone would save her. But she knew. They all did. The guests were already drifting toward me, shaking my hand, asking about new deals and future collaborations. I watched them come, one after another, and realized that for the first time in my life, the people in this family weren't looking past me. They were looking to me. The Holloway name didn't mean anything anymore. Not here. Not today. This was my retreat, my jet, my future. And there was nothing Carly, or any of them, could do to stop it. The retreat was supposed to last 4 days. But by the second afternoon, it was clear who everyone was really there to see. Carly and Dad tried to save face, tried to act like hosts, but they were barely an afterthought. The investors, the partners, they'd all quietly shifted their attention to me. I watched the change happen in real time. Conversations that used to swirl around Carly's plans and Dad's big ideas were now all about my firm's software updates, my partnerships, my vision for the future. They'd spent years building this image of themselves as the backbone of the family. Now, they were just filler. When the final dinner ended, and the guests trickled back to their rooms with their new itineraries, I found Dad pacing on the deck, the mountains glowing pink in the sunset. He turned to me, his eyes searching mine like he still didn't know who I was. "Son," he said quietly, his voice carefully measured, "we've had our differences, but you've made your point. You're in control now." I didn't bother hiding the small smile that tugged at the corners of my mouth. "Glad you noticed," I said. He swallowed hard. "So, what now? Do we pretend this never happened?" I shook my head. No more pretending, Dad. I let him stand there, staring at me like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Then I turned and walked back inside. Carly was waiting for me in the lounge, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You think this is funny, don't you?" she said, "making us look like fools in front of everyone?" I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't make you look like anything, Carly. You did that yourself." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in her life, she didn't have a comeback. A few minutes later, I called everyone into the main suite, the family, the people who'd once been so quick to cut me out. They filed in, silent and unsure. Mom was still clutching her scarf, her eyes red like she'd been crying. Dad stood stiffly beside her, his jaw tight. Carly wouldn't even look at me. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting them feel it. Then I spoke, my voice calm and final. "You're all taking a different flight home," I said. "Commercial, coach." Carly's head snapped up. "What?" "The retreat charges bounced," I said evenly. "The Holloway group cards were maxed out 2 months ago. My firm covered everything, the flights, the hotel, the meals. And now? You're done." Dad's face went white. "You can't just—" "I can," I said. "And I am." Carly's face twisted, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the right insult and couldn't. "I don't believe this," she said. "You're doing this to us, to your own family?" I shrugged. "You did it first," I said softly. Outside, the Uber I'd ordered was already waiting. A small, nondescript Kia, the final insult to the first-class lifestyle they'd always demanded. Before they left, I handed each of them a small box. Carly frowned as she opened hers, revealing a cheap plastic toy plane and a photo of her stunned face on the tarmac, taken by my assistant earlier that day. Beneath the photo, a note in my handwriting. "Real altitude doesn't come from jets. It comes from grit." Carly's lips moved soundlessly as she read it, her eyes darting to me. Mom made a small, strangled sound, like she was about to cry again. Dad didn't say a word, just stood there, shoulders hunched, beaten. They walked out in silence, down the long path to the waiting Uber. The driver, one of my old college buddies who'd always been there for me, the one they used to call a loser who'd never make it, gave me a small nod as he opened the door for them. I watched them go, my breath steady, my shoulders finally feeling light. For the first time, I wasn't the one left behind. They were. I turned away from the window, my smile small but real. The final lesson had been delivered, and for once, it was them who had to learn it. The fallout started before the retreat was even officially over. The flight home was only a couple of hours, but by the time they landed, the story had already begun to spread. Investors who'd quietly switched sides at the summit started talking, word trickling out like a slow leak, and then bursting into the open. It wasn't long before the local business news caught on. They ran the story with a headline that practically glowed, "From outcast to owner, the Holloway son who outsmarted them all." The article included a photo of me at the tarmac, wearing my old pullover and jeans, the jet behind me. The contrast was everything, and it said everything. I didn't give interviews. I let the pictures and the headlines speak for themselves. Every phone call from a reporter got sent straight to voicemail. Every email from some desperate family friend offering to smooth things over when unanswered. Meanwhile, the Holloway group was unraveling in real time. Carly's firm folded within weeks, the final straw after months of missed payments and broken promises. She tried to spin it as a pivot, a strategic downsize, but nobody bought it. The money had run out, and so had the excuses. Dad resigned from the family company a month later. I heard through the grapevine that he called it stepping back to reassess. But everyone knew the truth. He'd been forced out. No one wanted to be the last one tied to a sinking ship. Mom sold the mansion in Cherry Creek, the one she'd spent years showing off to every charity board she could charm. It went quietly, a cash sale to cover the legal fees that came with the SEC charges. She moved into a condo on the other side of town, smaller and quieter, a far cry from the Holloway estate she'd once lorded over. Every few days, some new scandal about their finances would pop up in the papers. Every time, I'd see the same quotes from anonymous sources. They thought they were untouchable. Turns out, it was all smoke and mirrors. And every time, I'd think about that letter that had started it all, that thick white envelope and the invitation that was supposed to leave me out once again. I didn't reach out to them. They didn't reach out to me, either. It was like we'd all agreed, silently, that the story was over. But there was one final twist that made it all feel complete. A month after the fallout went public, Carly called me. I didn't pick up, but she left a voicemail. Her voice was calm, almost mechanical, like she was reading a script. "Alex," she said, "I'm working as an unpaid intern now, at one of your startup incubators. I guess you really won." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She wasn't looking for sympathy, she was admitting defeat. And just like that, the final chapter was written. The family that once wrote me off had become a footnote in a story they never saw coming. And I didn't need to tell my side. I'd already told it in full. 1 year later, I got a text from Dad. Short and simple. Dinner this Sunday? Just us. Let's talk. I thought about ignoring it. After everything that had happened, after every smug smile and backhanded compliment, I wasn't sure there was anything left to say. But curiosity got the better of me. Maybe it was the last little thread of family loyalty I hadn't quite snipped. The diner he picked was a small place on the edge of town, one of those old spots with cracked vinyl booths and a chipped Formica counter. No fancy cars out front, no designer coats or pretense, just the smell of frying bacon and a waitress who called everyone honey. I walked in wearing the same jeans and jacket I'd worn at the retreat, the same clothes they'd once told me were too casual. Carly and Dad were already at a booth near the back. No fancy drinks this time, just 2 cups of coffee, steam curling up like a truce flag. They both looked up when I walked over. Carly's eyes were red-rimmed, but she managed a small smile. Dad cleared his throat and pushed out the word Alex like it was a peace offering. I sat down across from them. No one said anything for a moment. The clink of dishes and the low hum of oldies on the radio filled the gap. Finally, Dad spoke. I want to say, he began, his voice cracking just a bit. I want to say I'm sorry. I raised an eyebrow. For what, exactly? He looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumping. For all of it. For how we treated you. For not seeing what you were building. For acting like you'd never amount to anything. Carly nodded slowly, her eyes wet. I'm sorry, too, she said, her voice low. I thought if I kept you small in my head, it would make me feel bigger. I took a deep breath, feeling the old hurt stirring in my chest. You did more than that, I said. You used me. You laughed behind my back. You made me feel like I didn't belong. Dad swallowed hard. I know, and I won't pretend we can just move past it like nothing happened. But I want you to know we see it now. All of it. I let the words sit there for a minute, like I was weighing them against the years of everything else. Maybe I was. But I knew one thing. Forgiveness wasn't the point. The point was they'd said it. Out loud. Finally, I leaned back in the booth, my coffee going cold in front of me. You know, I said quietly, success isn't about titles or money. It's about not quitting, even when your own blood laughs in your face. Neither of them spoke. Carly just wiped her eyes and nodded. Dad let out a long sigh, like he was finally letting go of something he'd been gripping for decades. I stood up and dropped a couple bills on the table, enough to cover the coffee and a tip. I'm glad you wanted to talk, I said, but I'm not here to fix this for you. I can't. Dad's eyes met mine, and for the first time, he didn't look like the man who'd always needed to be in control. He just looked tired. I understand, he said. Good, I said softly, because I've got work to do. I turned and walked out, the bell above the door jingling behind me. And as I stepped into the cool night air, my phone buzzed with an alert. One of my companies had just closed on another acquisition, another former Holloway vendor, this one a piece of the puzzle they never even saw coming. I let out a breath, feeling that mix of satisfaction and calm settle in my chest. They tried to put me in a box, and I'd built an empire instead. They might have wanted my forgiveness, but what I wanted was something bigger, and I'd already claimed it. A few months later, I stood in the lobby of the old Holloway headquarters, or what used to be the Holloway headquarters. Anyway, my name was etched on the glass doors now, a sleek new sign that said exactly what I wanted it to say. Holloway Innovation Labs. My labs. My name. I bought the building outright after the family's collapse, gutting out the dusty offices and stale boardrooms and turning them into something different, something better. The first floor was now a mentorship space for underdogs, kids who'd been told they didn't have what it took, or that they didn't belong. I'd been one of those kids. I wanted to make sure they'd have a different ending. I walked through the glass doors that morning, the air bright and clean, the smell of fresh paint and new beginnings all around me. A group of high school interns clustered near the coffee bar, talking excitedly about their projects, real ideas, real products. One of them caught sight of me and straightened up, eyes wide. Mr. Holloway, she said, her voice nervous. Is it true you started all this because your own family didn't believe in you? I smiled. That's part of it, I said. But the bigger reason? I wanted to show that where you come from doesn't matter. What matters is what you build. She nodded, her eyes bright. Thank you, she said, for giving us this chance. I clapped her on the shoulder. Make it count, I said simply. As I walked down the hall to my office, I passed the old conference room where my dad used to hold court, barking orders and cracking jokes that no one found funny. The long table was gone now, replaced by whiteboards covered in sketches and sticky notes. The new tenants were kids with messy hair and big dreams, the kind of people who never would have made it past the front desk in my family's old world. I pushed open my office door. The first thing you saw was a framed photo of the jet that started it all, hanging behind my desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Above it, in neat black letters, was my own mantra: real altitude doesn't come from jets. It comes from grit. Carly worked here now, too, though not in any big office or executive suite. She was down the hall, a low-level project manager at one of my startup incubators. She kept her head down, and when we passed each other in the halls, she'd give a quick nod and then look away. No more smug smiles or backhanded compliments, just quiet acceptance of where we both stood. That morning, she paused by my door for a second, like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. She just gave a quick nod and kept walking, and that was fine. I didn't need her words anymore. I sat down at my desk and looked out the window. The city skyline rose in the distance, clean and bright, the way it always looked after a fresh snow. My phone buzzed with a new notification, another grant application from a high school student, another chance to lift someone else the way no one had ever lifted me. I closed my eyes for a second, breathing in the quiet of my office. The peace of it. I thought about all the times they'd called me a burden or a disappointment, all the times they told me I didn't fit. And then I smiled, because in the end, I hadn't just proven them wrong. I'd built something better, and this time, it wasn't about them. It was about everyone else who'd ever been told they didn't belong and showing them that they did. No failures allowed. I murmured to myself, feeling the weight of the promise in my chest. The family name didn't matter anymore. My name did, and I knew, finally and completely, that was all I needed.